Hello, everyone. Very warm good morning to all of you, and welcome to Unacademy. Welcome to today's The Hindu newspaper analysis, where we take a look at the daily edition of today's The Hindu newspaper, analyze the articles for their relevance in the prelims and the mains examination, declutter the information provided there, and also we shall be discussing a couple of articles which have been mentioned in the PIB as well. So, first of all, the articles that we are going to discuss today, in total, we are going to have a discussion of around nine different topics. So, in the FAQ section of the newspaper, what is the Saudi US nuclear deal about? Now, this follows the earlier news story about the Saudi US civil nuclear deal, but the complications around it and how it can complicate the geopolitical situation in Middle East going ahead into the future is what this article is talking about. We will discuss about it, relevant for your GS paper 2. Why are there protests over the Cane Betwa project? Now, there had been a kind of a hunger strike and large scale protest of tribals associated with the Cane Betwa interlinking. Now, what is that Cane Betwa interlinking? And why is it that the tribals were protesting? Why was there a hunger strike of 18 days? And also, what are the other issues involved in it? Here, we will take a look at it in a comprehensive way. We'll provide the arguments in favor, we'll provide the arguments against, so that it will help you in the mains answer writing. We'll take a look at the practice mains question here as well, relevant for your GS paper 1. What caused the tunnel disaster in Sikkim's Namchi? Now, one of India's first sad such events has occurred, where the tunnel disaster has occurred in the sense that an explosive disaster due to unlocking of methane from the tunnel. So, why did this happen? The vulnerability of Himalayas to disasters, and with the help of the image, how is it that this entire process unfolded? Relevant for your GS paper 3. India's rice fields rank amongst the world's top methane sources. Now, this is about the methane emission due to the paddy cultivation that we are carrying out. We are amongst the largest producers of paddy across the world. We have become the largest producers, and that is why this is a point of concern. Our paddy fields in themselves, they emit more methane, almost close to what the entire country of Germany ends up emitting. So this becomes relevant for your GS paper 3 again. Now, few articles relevant for your prelims examination. US's new 10% tariffs will not affect 45% of Indian exports. Not that very relevant because it is a developing story. Now, center considering two new dry ports in Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, and Samudra Manthan mission. So, what are the dry ports? What is the importance of dry ports? Is what we will take a look into. Samudra Manthan mission is what we will take a look into. What is that Samudra Manthan mission? Now, here, the drilling across the Mahanadi River Basin has been carried out. Sarnath has been added to the UNESCO heritage list. Okay, so here basically this has also been dealt in the case of the portion associated with your PIB. So we will cover the PIB portion here. And in PIB, another article that we will cover is Disha 2.0. What are the aspects associated with Disha 2.0? Okay. Now, here, basically, if we take a look at the first article, what does it tell us about? Now, this is about the talked about Saudi US civil nuclear deal. Now, when we talk about the Saudi US nuclear deal, first of all, relevance for your GS paper 2. Now, even though it has been mentioned in the newspaper headlines in the past as well, this is a broader outlook into the US deal. It is not just the narration of the headlines here. Now, let us take a look at the entire aspect of it. First of all, Saudi Arabia under Mohammed bin Salman for a long period of time has been arguing for diversification away from oil. Saudi Arabia wants to build its economy, and its economic vision for the future also talks about why and how Saudis should move away from the oil resources. Now, oil is something which has fueled the Saudi economy. If you take a look at the region 100 years ago, it was a completely impoverished condition and a completely impoverished province. And within the span of around 70 to 80 years, the entire region has been earmarked with prosperity associated with the oil reserves. But then, fossil fuels have their own issue. Fossil fuels have the problem of not only causing greenhouse gas emissions, but the entire world is trying to phase out of fossil fuels. Now, Saudis have earned substantially, but the Saudis do know that they need to diversify into the digital economy in the sense of trying to become the data center hub, trying to become the AI hub, and so on. Ensure they become the business hub, as is the case with the neighboring country of UAE. They also know that tourism is one of those sectors that they have to tap. Now, all these are the measures which will carry them forward and carry their growth forward going ahead into this century. And that is what Mohammed bin Salman has been arguing about. Now, understand the context of it. In 2009, US and UAE arrived at a civil nuclear deal. And mind you, Saudis and the Emiratis, they are not very, so to say, hand in glove. They don't look each other eye to eye. And oftentimes, there is a kind of a competitive spirit. That is why you would have seen that when the Saudis basically had the defense pact in recent past with the Pakistanis, the Emiratis had a defense pact with us, India. So that is basically where in 2009, US signed that civil nuclear deal with UAE. It was around the same time that India also got the civil nuclear deal from US, by the way. Now, Saudis have been pushing for their own civil nuclear deal. They want energy reliance, they want energy security, they want affordable power, and they want a future free from oil. But then, US has been very, very reluctant. Now, in this context, you also have to understand one thing. Saudis are one of the biggest buyers of the US arms, right? And the United States has got a permanent foothold in the region of the Arabian Peninsula owing to the allowing of that by the Saudis. The base, the US military base, etc., which operates in the region, is by the blessing of the Saudis themselves. So that is why for US also, Saudi Arabia is very important. Now, while MBS or Mohammed bin Salman had been pushing for it, US was slightly reluctant. But then, this year, Mr. Trump initiated the Iran war. Now, when the Iran war was initiated, mind you, Iran war was initiated why? Initially, initially, not now, initially with the suspicion that Iran has got substantial nuclear enrichment facilities and can develop a nuclear bomb which will threaten the entire world and will threaten the entire region. Now that is why US and Israel started bombing Iran. Now ever since the Iran war has started, Iran has retaliated against the Gulf states. Now when Iran retaliated against the Gulf states, imagine the situation for the Saudis now. Okay? Take a look at the worldview from the point of the Saudis for a brief moment. Now they are being attacked by Iran. Now they feel it is of no fault of their own. Now, other than that, even when negotiations are being talked about, nuclear enrichment facilities in Iran is not even being discussed in the peace deal. It is talked about that, okay, you won't be developing a nuclear weapon, but Iran already has those nuclear centrifuges and enrichment facility, which no other country in the region has. So that is not even in the agenda. So that is where the Saudis, who initially thought that maybe the US will defang Iran or take away those enrichment facilities away from Iran, now Saudis know that Iran will retain them. So there is that kind of insecurity which has developed into the Saudis as well. Thirdly, now when Iran has retaliated against the Gulf states due to the war, now all the Gulf states are mulling over it, all the Gulf states are thinking over it that why should we host a US base at all? If we would not have had a US base on our soil, maybe we would have been more secure. Now, as a consequence of that, What has been the case? US wants to provide incentives to these countries that this is the benefit that you will gain by hosting us. So this is where Saudis have felt a lack of incentive for hosting the US military. And mind you, the most of all, US has got a very strong defense industrial complex. That defense industrial complex, ever since the time of John F. Kennedy in the 60s, has been driving the policymakers and the major agenda items across US policy making. Any of them, if you consider from Ronald Reagan to the case of Lyndon Johnson to JFK, all of them have at some point or the other been impacted by the defense industrial complex. Now, the Saudis also have threatened the US that don't use our facilities, but going ahead into the future, we will also consider the purchasing of arms from the European partners, diversifying their sources of arms import. That would impact the US defense industrial complex quite substantially. Because Saudis, they basically shop for those weapons, missiles, as well as the aircrafts, like a kid goes to Hamleys, just picking up what they want. They have endless amount of purse. So this is where it is the case of economic impact. Now, under these circumstances, the US Energy Secretary basically announced that we have signed the civil nuclear deal. Now, under this civil nuclear deal, the Saudis will be allowed to operate the nuclear facilities, which will be run by the US firms, by the way. That will be run by the US firms. It won't be run by the Saudis. It won't be operated by the Saudi companies. It will be operated by the US firms. So it will benefit the US. Along with that, Saudis, they get a kind of an assurance that, okay, we have nuclear development and nuclear energy on our own land. Now, I mentioned this 2009 deal a bit earlier. Now, what is the relevance of this? You see, whenever you sign the civil nuclear agreement with any country like India, UAE, Saudi Arabia, etc., there is always that doubt or the issue of proliferation. What does that mean? That what if I basically end up using that facility, I end up proliferating nuclear materials or leaking those secrets of technology, and also nuclear, enriched nuclear, I began to smuggle. Or I use this facility to develop enriched uranium and thereby make a bomb of my own. Now, that is not something why civil nuclear arrangements are made for. So that is why in 2009, when US signed that nuclear deal with India or even in UAE, at that point of time, with UAE, US put additional safeguards that additional enrichment cannot be done, right? Additional enrichment cannot be done, right? Can't be done from their existing facilities. And they will come under the additional safeguards of IAEA. Now, what is that additional safeguard of IAEA? That the inspectors can come to your facility at a very short notice and can carry out inspection just to see if they are enriching them illegally or not. That was signed by UAE. But this deal does not have any aspect associated with the additional protocol of IAEA. So that is where there is a global concern that what if the Saudis, with the help of the Pakistanis are the well known proliferators of nuclear materials and nuclear technology across the world. What if the Saudis, along with the Pakistanis, they carry out nuclear proliferation? Now, that is a criticism. But then you see, any aspect is basically pre Trump and post Trump. Any global issue can be discussed pre Trump and post Trump. Now, this was the announcement which was made by the US Energy Secretary. But then, when the reporters asked the question to Mr. Trump being Mr. Trump, he basically said that, look, we will have this agreement with the Saudis only if they agree to the Abraham Accords. Abraham Accords, initiated by the US, basically talks about formalizing the diplomatic relation of the region with Israel. Now, since Joe Biden, US has been nudging Saudis to have a formalized relation with Israel. Now, it is at that point of time, remember when India hosted the G20 summit, that immediately Saudis were on board and signed the IMEC, India Middle East Corridor, Economic Corridor, whereby you had the transit route from Saudi Arabia to the Haifa port in Israel and eventually leading to the region of Europe. Now, that was seen as the normalizing of relationship between the Saudis and Israel. But then, after that, what happened? Owing to the attacks in Israel, Israel then followed the genocidal attack in the region of Gaza. Now, after that, Saudi Arabia has hardened its stance. Saudi Arabia has said that we will not diplomatically recognize Israel unless and until there is the establishment of a Palestinian nation as per the pre 1967 border. Now, this hardening of stance means Saudi Arabia has declined to agree to the Abraham Accords. Now, this was a follow up question which was asked to no one else than Mr. Trump himself. Now, the leaders of various different countries can give different nuanced answers and diplomatic answers or not give any answers at all. But Mr. Trump, again being Mr. Trump, said that if the Saudis do not agree to Abraham Accords, there will be no deal. We will tear up the agreement and no civil nuclear agreement will move ahead. So that is why this nuclear agreement is being talked about, that what it is about and why it can change the geopolitical order in the region of Middle East. Okay, so let's expand upon it further in a written format so that you are able to retain this, you are able to reproduce this if asked for the exam. Now, US and Saudi Arabia signed a civil nuclear cooperation agreement and a bilateral nuclear safeguards agreement. It basically lays the foundation for a 30-year strategic nuclear partnership between the two countries. Now, US companies will assist Saudi Arabia in developing its nuclear energy sector. Now, why do Saudis need the nuclear energy? First of all, two reasons, two broader aspects. One is diversification away from oil, diversification away from oil. Okay. Now, in the era of AI requires endless amount of energy. Conventional sources of energy are seen to be inadequate to fuel the AI led growth. That is where small modular reactors and nuclear reactors are seen as a solution in order to fuel that AI led growth. So, this is where AI led economic growth, economic growth, okay. Then, this is the energy of the future. Now, other reason is basically the case of security. Now, when we say security, there is only one country in the mind of all the other Gulf nations, that is Iran. That is where there is a very interesting take which has been published in the Washington Post last week, which basically talks about, it was a piece picked up from The Economist, and then you had the Washington Post carrying out the editorial pieces. So, what it was about is that the present day Iran war is not about the US Iran war. People think it is Israel which is carrying out that war, and US is just a tool on the hands of Mr. Netanyahu. But then it is not even Israel's war. The article had argued that it is actually a war between Iran and the Gulf nations. It is the war of supremacy, establishing the hegemon in the region, making the countries of the region accept that Iran is indeed the supreme power when it comes to defense, when it comes to nuclear security, when it comes to resilience to stand up to superpowers. No other such countries can do. Now, Iran is the only country in the region with established enrichment and nuclear power and nuclear tech. No other country can do that. So that is where there is that sense of insecurity. Now, what is the agreement about? The agreement, it basically lets the US share peaceful nuclear materials, equipment, and know how with Saudi Arabia, right? And mind you, here also, tech sharing is not there. US companies will get first pick of Saudi Arabia's future nuclear power projects. This is where Mr. Trump and his industrialist friends will also benefit. The agreement also sets up checks to the uh, peaceful program, right? Here, covering the enrichment of uranium, making fuel out of the uranium, converting nuclear fuel, and reprocessing fuel. So, this is where additional protocols have been signed. These are covered under additional safeguards. Small modular reactor, see, in the condition of war, if a war is to be broken out, please understand, if let's suppose tomorrow India and Pakistan they arrive at a war, right? In that particular case, do you think the Pakistanis will attack your nuclear facilities at all? Never. Why? Because there is an agreement whereby on 1st of January every year, both India and Pakistan they share the list of entire nuclear installations that they have, so that in the case of war, even accidental firing on these does not happen. This is covered very substantially under the various conventions of the UN, and this is taken upon very seriously by the global community as well. Because once you attack the nuclear facilities, you open the window for the nuclear war. So, even in the case of a war, nuclear facilities are not attacked unless and until you are at war with US and US wants to destroy your nuclear facilities. Even under that, they will not attack your nuclear reactors. Never. They can attack your nuclear enrichment facilities. Enrichment facilities are very different from the nuclear power production. Nuclear power production is where you can have endless amount of damage, but enrichment facilities they run on conventional power. So that is basically covered under multiple conventions across the world. And that is basically why even hostile nations, under the conditions of hostility, that is, consider the case of India, Pakistan, they do share with each other the entire list of where your nuclear facilities are situated so that that can be avoided. Okay. Now, Saudi Arabia will buy nuclear fuel instead of making its own so that the initial proliferation threat, etc., is sidelined. Now, here, there has been certain exception which has been provided to the Saudis as compared to the 2009 US UAE nuclear arrangement. Right. So here, the Saudi deal does not require Saudi Arabia to permanently renounce nuclear enrichment or spent fuel reprocessing. It is only a temporary aspect. It also proposes a 2-year study period. Now, this 2-year joint feasibility study period will study whether nuclear enrichment inside Saudi Arabia is commercially and economically viable or not. If it is considered to be feasible, economically viable, in that case, the US firms will operate the enrichment facility in the region of Saudi Arabia. Right? Now, why it has been done? To benefit the US firms, first of all, and to prevent the transfer of sensitive tech to the Saudis. But the Saudis are hoping that after, let's suppose, the 2 year period, after that, maybe eventually in the 5, 6 year period, they will be able to gain that tech and they will be able to develop that enrichment tech on their own. By the way, mind you, the Saudis always have had this kind of a policy that we don't need to have that technology on our own. It was in the late 60s and the early 70s when the Saudi crown prince at that point of time had made the very infamous statement, why to build a bomb when we can buy one? And that is where basically the evidence had indicated they pumped in huge amount of money into the Pakistani nuclear weapons development. That is when Pakistan, when it carried out its nuclear testing in 1998 at that 1998 99, at that point of time, the Saudis celebrated as the Pakistani bomb being the first Islamic bomb, because they always had that kind of an understanding that we can buy it from the Pakistanis as well. And now that they have the defense agreement with Pakistan, I don't think nuclear weapon is of prime concern, but nonetheless, you would want to have tech in the long run. Now, the IAEA safeguards which have been exempted. So, International Atomic Energy Agency additional protocol which allows for the periodic checks that has been exempted in the case of Saudi Arabia, which again has led to criticism owing to the possible proliferation. Now, what are the geopolitical implications of this move? Iran will have its own security concerns now when it will see that nuclear energy is being transferred or nuclear technology is being transferred in the neighboring region. It will harden its stance when it comes to the negotiations with the US. Maybe it is one of the negotiating tactics that the US is using. It would encourage Tehran to further harden its position regarding nuclear and uranium enrichment. It would lead to a regional nuclear competition. It will also have an implication on Abraham Accords, right? Abraham Accords basically that normalized Israel's relation with the other countries, and that is basically where it also has got a greater implication on the formalization or the hardening of the stance of the Abraham Accords. Okay, now we move on to the next article: How to Study Geography Basics. Sanjana, are you? I hope you are attending the NCRT classes that we are having on YouTube every day, Monday to Friday, 7 p.m. If not, do attend them. You will understand geography from the very basics, and the entire portion will be covered. Okay, take a look at the recordings with the help of animations and images. We are approaching geography in a very different way than what your traditional books do. Right now, why are there protests over the Kane Betwa project? Kane Betwa project, what is this? It is a part of the river interlinking project. And river interlinking project is what? Transferring water from a river channel of excess to a river channel of deficiency. Now, this river interlinking project, by the way, in India has got its own historical background. It was first formulated during the British era in the 1920s by the British administrator, basically named Sir Arthur Cotton. Now, Sir Arthur Cotton was the British official in the Madras presidency. And he talked about the fact that, look, in India, you have the case where some part of the country is flooded. At the same time, some other part of the country is experiencing droughts, famines. Why can't we have excess water from one river channel being transferred to the deficient river channel so that all the regions will benefit? Irrigation can be carried out, farmers will have the prosperity. India never had enough money to carry out the interlinking project. The country, when it became independent at that point of time, interlinking of river project was basically initiated by the government. The idea was initiated, but all the reports, they told the government that, look, it is going to be a very costly endeavor, something that you cannot afford. And mind you, newly independent India did not have that financial fulcrum or that financial base to carry out these massive exercises. So it was put on the back burner. Then again, it was picked up by the government, subsequent governments in the 70s. 70s, mind you. You had the 73 crisis, 1973. 1973 is quite important for us because it was the year when you had the twin years of farm crisis due to droughts in India. Twin consecutive years of droughts, the cartelization of the oil producing nations due to the Yom Kippur War. So, weaponization of oil in the global trade had occurred, due to which the oil prices had increased. So, think about it. During 1973, you basically had 20 years of farm crisis, oil prices were high, inflation rate has had touched close to around 29 to 30%. Okay. So India was in deep crisis at that point of time. Again, the planners, they thought about interlinking of the rivers. But again, the same problem came up. We don't have enough resources to connect the various different rivers. Then, during the prime ministership of late Sri Atal Bihari Vajpayee, at that point of time, this was picked up with greater vigor. And this is where detailed project reports were readied. But then future implementation could not be carried out. The government basically was was voted out of power. And after that, the next government which came in basically put this on the sideline. It was during the year of 2009, 8 and 9. Remember, there was a global financial crisis, and along with that, there was the case of a very strong El Nino in 2009, again leading to a farm crisis. That is when there was widespread drought, lack of irrigation facilities, and most of you would be tiny tots at that point of time. But at those times of 2008, 2009, you had this famous water express trains, which would be operated by the Indian Railways. Okay, whereby you had large trains carrying water which would reach various districts, and it would make national headlines that today a water train will be basically run up till Satara. Today a water train will be reaching the region of Telangana, like that. Now, when this was an issue which was very prominent leading to farm suicides, Supreme Court picked up the issue. Okay. Supreme Court picked up the issue, and basically Supreme Court directed the government that you have to basically carry out the interlinking of river. Obviously, it was a litigation which was filed, which initiated the Supreme Court action. But then, basically, Supreme Court directed the government, the court being the court, it can tell you anything. Supreme Court directed the government around 2011 that from next year prepare the detailed project report, and from 2013 think about implementation of the interlinking of the river project. So this is the entire background. Then you had the new government which was voted in. The new government started this and picked up the project of interlinking of rivers. Now, at that point of time, one of the issues which was picked up, or one of the regions which was picked up, was the Kane Betwa interlink project. Now, Kane and Betwa, both being the part of the larger Ganga River system and being a part of the Yamuna River system as a subcategory. Now, both of them drain through a very dry region of India, the region known as Bundelkhand. Bundelkhand covers several districts of Madhya Pradesh and certain districts of Uttar Pradesh as well. Now, that region is known for droughts, historically notorious for droughts. So much so that many farmers in the area left their land, sold their land at peanut values, and went to Delhi, Lucknow, Indore, and other places to work as migrant laborers. Bundelkhand had become the region and was the region of out migration in large numbers, and farm crisis was something which could always be identified with the region of Bundelkhand. So Kane and Betwa rivers were seen as a vital link whereby through the link canal you could provide water to Bundelkhand region. Now it is a different matter. Now Bundelkhand is basically developing into an industrial corridor. So, and also you have a higher value chain addition farming whereby dragon fruit and strawberry farming is also being carried out. But nonetheless, larger scale water availability is missing. This is when the Kane Betwa Interlink project comes in. It talks about constructing around 221 kilometer of link canal with 2 kilometer of underground tunnel, carrying excess water from River Kane into the River Betwa. Okay. Now, when you carry that construction exercise, there will be dams which will be constructed, barrages which will be constructed. It is not like setting up a pipe between your kitchen and the washroom that suddenly water will be diverted. It is a large scale construction project, isn't it? So, that is basically where you had the case of multiple environmental issues also coming up. Panna Tiger Reserve basically would get submerged as a result of this. Now, what has come into light due to which this 44,000 Kane Betwa interlink 44,000 crore Kane Betwa interlink project was put in doubt was a hunger strike. Now, in the past few days, Sonam Wangchuk's hunger strike had grabbed all the headlines, and rightfully so. But then there was a hunger strike which happened in the region around Kane Betwa interlink. It was an 18-day hunger strike. And that is where it was about the submergence of the land and also the compensation being provided to the tribals for that submergence. Now, this is a major issue for us in India. Ever since the Sardar Sarovar project across River Narmada, there has always been protest associated with the building of the dams and the submergence of the land for the tribals and what is the compensation given to them. Over a period of time, the government of India has recalibrated the compensation amount, tried to provide around 4x of the market value, and so on. But there have also been cases of gross negligence where the officials and the bureaucracy on the ground basically connives and gives you lesser than what you deserve. And that is where they end up making huge amount of windfall gains. And this is something which is unfolding in the region of the area of Bundelkhand as well, where certain tribal families have basically alleged that the entire land of theirs was being taken away for only rupees 2 lakh. Think about it. Your land being taken away for 2 lakh rupees. Now, where will that tribal community go ahead? Okay. So that is basically why these protests have been going ahead. Now, for your examination perspective, you need to know the river interlinking, the details of Kane Betwa interlink, the dams being constructed under the different phases. You have two important dams, Daudhan Dam across river um, Kane and Or Dam across river Or, which is a tributary of Betwa. So you need to know these. Other than that, you need to know the arguments in favor and against the interlinking. So this is the detail that you need to know. Okay. So we will contextualize it in a written format. Okay. So first of all, what is the interlink project? It is basically the case of Kane to Betwa interlink. Okay. This is the entire region of Bundelkhand consisting of certain districts of Madhya Pradesh, certain districts of Uttar Pradesh as well. Beneficiary districts of Bundelkhand region in MP, Chhatarpur, Panna, and Tikamgarh, in UP, Banda, Jhansi, Mahoba, and Lalitpur. Now, irrigation benefits is something that started since the time of Sir Arthur Cotton, since that point of time. Okay. So the aspect is that look, for river interlinking, you will construct the barrages, dams for water storage. So, in a way, you can use that for hydroelectricity as well, and nowadays solar energy as well. So, this project is expected to generate 78 megawatt of power along with huge amount of irrigation potential. But I want you to focus on this map. Here you would observe this is River Cane. Okay. Now, this is where you have the Panna Biosphere Reserve and the Tiger Reserve. It is here that the Dodhan Dam is being constructed. So that would lead to submergence. And here, this is your link canal, constructing it to Betwa. Okay. So this area will get submerged. This area will get submerged. So that is relevant for your exam. Okay. Now, what is the project about in a nutshell? So it envisages transferring water from the Cane River to the Betwa River, both of the tributaries of Yamuna. It will be 221 kilometers in length, including a 2-kilometer tunnel. Now, it is expected to provide annual irrigation to around 10.6 lakh hectares of land. Please do not ignore this as a value proposition, because in an agrarian economy, agrarian country, not an agrarian economy, agrarian country of ours, where 45% of the labor force is still deployed in agriculture, around half of the land still does not have irrigation facilities, which means what? Seasonal vagaries, rainfall deficiencies will always lead to farm failure, and that will lead to low farm income. So, anything which can provide irrigation has got a long term impact. Now, the components under the project: the Dodhan Dam on the Cane River, Cane Betwa Link Canal, two tunnels for water transfer, hydropower stations, and in phase two, Lower Ore Dam, the Kotha Barrage, and Bina Complex Multipurpose Project. This is relevant for your prelims. Okay. In mains exam, also, you can highlight this as a value proposition. Agricultural benefits: 10.62 lakh hectares, drinking water supply to 62 lakh people, generation of 103 megawatt hydropower, 27 megawatt solar power, and benefits in various regions: reduction of farm distress, groundwater replenishment. All of these are some of the benefits. The challenges: the tribal communities are protesting against few things. First is submergence of land. They don't want to lose the land. Now, if even if they presume that submergence is inevitable, they are not happy with the compensation. Compensation. Now, in this compensation, what is it that they are demanding? They are demanding that each adult in the household be treated individually. Rather than family being provided the compensation, each adult should be provided that amount of compensation, around 12.5 lakh rupees. Now, this is what the demand is. But as is the case with the protest generally, demand is oftentimes maximalist. The government comes up here, then the compromise is reached. We do hope that the compromise is reached in a fair and justifiable manner, because there have been indications of the misappropriation of funds by the officials as well. Okay. And just to give you an insight, oftentimes it is the case where even senior bureaucrats are not aware about these misdoings. Otherwise, you would have come across endless news stories that a very low grade official having being found with a property of 200 crores, 300 crores, 400 crores. Where does that amassing of property come from? Right? So that compensation is oftentimes a major issue. And mind you, when you talk about compensation for the dams, this is where Narmada Bachao Andolan by Medha Patkar, since the time of Sardar Sarovar project, Then the opposition to the upliftment of the height of Sardar Sarovar project. Then you had the similar kind of issue in other parts of the country as well. So this is a an ongoing issue in India. Having said that, there has been a compensatory rise in the uh, price of the land that is acquired by the government. But the ground realities in this case is different. Environmental challenges, submergence of the land, submergence of biosphere reserve, right? Submergence of the land. This is a major issue. Okay. Now, for your means, I want you to have point wise answers. So, the arguments in favor, arguments against the interlinking. Okay. And associated with the Panna Tiger Reserve and the Cane Betwa interlink. Use this in order to write answers. So, addresses the chronic water scarcity in the region of Bundelkhand is the argument in favor why the interlinking should be carried out. Then expands irrigation and agricultural productivity, overall efficiency in the era of climate change. Basically, that is where it is very, very important to carry out the interlinking. Provides drinking water facilities to millions, generates renewable energy, may reduce rural distress and the migration. Rural to urban migration, mind you, is creating a lot of issues in all the urban areas. Environmental stress, pollution, housing issues, law and order issues, all of this can be linked to the portion of rural to urban migration. Serves as a pilot for future river linking projects, which are very, very vital in many parts of the country. Okay, groundwater recharge and other factors you can add. However, there are arguments against. Large scale displacement of the tribal communities will happen. Here, one other argument that you can add addresses the twin issue of flood and drought. That both floods and droughts occur in the same region, that will be addressed because excess water will be diverted. So, large scale displacement of tribal communities, ecological damage to the Panna Tiger Reserve, loss of forest and diversity, questions over the scientific basis of surplus water. Now, as per the project, water is to be transferred from Cane to Betwa. So, Cane is supposed to be surplus and Betwa is supposed to be deficit. But recent records have indicated that Cane River channel is carrying low water levels due to climate change. So, this has also been cited as the multiplication of dryness. That rather than surplus to deficit, one dry area will lead to multiple dry areas. That is the doubt. High financial cost and long implementation period has been one of the disadvantage ever since the time of independence. Concerns regarding rehabilitation, consent to the farmer provided by the Gram Sabhas, that is also being fudged up as per the records. Okay, let's take a look at the practice question. Discuss the concept of interlinking of rivers and weigh in their role in providing water security. As a candidate for civil services, never hold very strong opinion about anything. You should have the clarity in mind to talk about both the aspects of the argument always. Okay, now when you have to talk about interlinking of rivers, you have to necessarily indicate both the sides of the argument. Now, here, the question in itself is very direct. And this kind of mains question has been asked since the time of late 2000s. It has been asked in interview also, in mains also. So, what do you write in your intro? What is interlinking? That is what you write. Transfer of water, or you can initiate from 1920, Sir Arthur Cotton, any of those. Okay. Now, after this, you have to talk about in the portion of the body that interlinking has got various components. One is the Himalayan component, interlinking of Himalayan rivers. Other is the peninsular component, interlinking of the peninsular river system. Give that. Then, as an example, talk about the Kane Betwa interlinking project. Okay. Now, when you talk about the case of weigh in their role in providing water security, this is talking about arguments in favor. In favor. There, you will talk about construction of dams, barrages. You will talk about the case of the water storage structures, lift irrigation canals. You will talk about the case of the groundwater recharge, increased irrigation, increased drinking water facilities. This is what you will be talking about in detail in the arguments in favor. But that is not the completion of your answer. This is where, after this, you will write, however, certain challenges they do prevail. Now, what are the challenges that you will talk about? Here, you will be talking about the case of transfer of dryness, right? Concept of surplus. In the era of climate change, concept of surplus is in question. Okay? Then you will talk about destruction of forest land can always impact the water cycle and thereby reduce the amount of rainfall. Okay? Because you have to talk about only water security. Here, displacement of people, etc., will not take the prime aspect in your answer. Keep that in mind. Write the answer of what is asked, not what you know. So, cutting down or submergence of forest will impact the water cycle of forest, will impact the water cycle. Okay. Now, once you have written these, how to conclude? Because the question is of water security, you have to talk about it. Interlinking of rivers is not the ultimate panacea or the ultimate solution to water security or water scarcity. It involves water security requires a multi-pronged approach of rainwater harvesting, local area watershed management, ensuring micro irrigation, efficient water use, recycling, and reduce principles in the water management to ensure water sufficiency to the last household across the country. And only then can India be truly water secure and link it to the Viksit Bharat 2047. That is how you conclude the answer. You fetch the maximum marks. Okay. Biodiversity loss also impacts. That is what you will talk about in the case of the forest and so on. Yes, correct. Now, what caused the tunnel disaster in Sikkim's Namchi? Now, Sikkim, disaster prone region, but typically the disaster that you hear about is earthquakes, some avalanches, glacial lake outbursts, floods, etc. This time the disaster was very different. What was the disaster? Now, basically, just to give you a broader idea, in the mountainous ecosystem, you had the NHPC, right? National Hydroelectric Power Corporation. It was digging a tunnel. Why does the NHPC need to dig a tunnel? In order to transfer water. Generally, in a hydroelectric power plant, you have the water which is stored, and then it is transferred to the through the tunnels into the TG set, the turbine generator sets, so that they gain that momentum and they are able to rotate it and generate electricity. For that, you need long tunnels, oftentimes multiple kilometers. Now, when this tunnel was being dug, at that point of time, there was a methane packet, right, embedded within the rocks. And this is basically where the workers hit that methane packet. It led to an explosion. Why? Methane is inflammable. And when you drill into the rocks, there are sparks produced. Methane, when it leaks out and mixes with the normal oxygen, it becomes combustible, highly combustible. And then the presence of the sparks can immediately ignite it. And in a closed space, if that ignition happens, it will lead to a disastrous explosion. So, this is what has happened in the region of Sikkim. But why do we have methane in the region of Himalayas? What is the reason behind it? Now, when you consider the Himalayas, mind you, Himalayas were not always the mountains of the world. They were not always the roof of the world. Himalayas, for a longer period of time, they were submerged under the oceans, right? These were the oceanic beds and sedimentary plains. Over a period of time, the convergence has happened. As a consequence of that, the oceanic floor, the Tethys Sea which was present, the sea floor got uplifted. Along with that, the sedimentary plains of the Indian plate has been pushed up. Now, before being pushed up, these sedimentary plains and the deep ocean beds, they basically had multiple vegetation, etc., which would have been trapped within the sediments. Now, when the supply of oxygen gets cut off, over a period of time, anaerobic microbes, they start decomposing those materials, and that is where methane is produced. And mind you, the region of Sikkim, around the area of Namchi, southern Sikkim in particular, is the area where recently there was a discovery of coal reserve as well. Coal having around 52% of carbon, right? Around 38% of ash. Always remember, in India, the ash content is very, very high. So that is basically where you had the case of coal being found. Means coal is also formed as a result of what? Fossilization of vegetation. That process can produce methane also. That means the entire region is prone to having fossil fuels, also presence of methane. Now, when that drilling was done, it was a disaster waiting to happen. And this is where a better analysis, scientific tools, and the contractor who has violated this needs to be punished severely. In recent times, we have seen, even though the article does not mention this, but in the past 1 month, we have seen two such disasters. Wayanad, where the contractor knew that basically the soil debris which is kept can lead to debris flow, did not clear it despite multiple warnings. Sikkim, where again it was the negligence of the implementer, the contractor. So this is where we need to have very, very strong uh, criminal penalty being imposed upon them. But again, the cases take far too long. Now, anyways, the context, tragic incident occurred inside the head race tunnel. Head race tunnel is what? So you have the headwater in the hydroelectric power plant that is in the reservoir that eventually is redirected through the head race tunnel. Of the NHPC's 500 megawatt Tista Stage 4 hydroelectric project, now here 25 workers lost their life. First recorded tunnel disaster in India associated with methane gas release. Now, here, this is the schematic representation of what actually happened. Drilling into the methane bearing rocks was initiated. Methane, which was already trapped in the rocks, due to which sudden release of methane started to occur. Now they mixed with oxygen, which allowed for the combustion to happen. Then you had basically the case of the sparks leading to ignition. And when you have the burning of methane or any carbon based compound, monoxide is produced in huge quantity. And that monoxide, just by inhalation of that also, and overexposure to that also can lead to death. So that has also led to the death. And the confined space in the region, exposure to toxic gases, has created the havoc. Okay, correct, Karan. Now, why does methane get trapped in the mountainous rocks? So, millions of years ago, plants and organisms died and got buried under the sediments. Over millions of years, in the absence of oxygen and under high pressure and temperature, the organic matter decomposed to produce CH4, that is methane. Now, the porous sedimentary rocks means methane gets trapped, right? Oftentimes, to the fractures, the methane accumulates in certain areas, creating underground gas pockets. Now, this is oftentimes found to be present near the coal beds. Okay. Not only found in mountainous rocks, even in the case of Peninsular Plateau, Chota Nagpur Plateau, you have had the cases where coal mine disasters have occurred because of methane being exposed. So, wherever you have these fossilization which has happened, geological history of fossilization which has happened, methane production can always go hand in hand. Now, so, why mountainous regions are prone? Complex tectonic evolution. Himalayas are tectonically unstable. It is a region of an active fault zone as well. As it is increasing in height, the faults are deepening. Gas pockets are also accumulating. Now, presence of sedimentary rocks and southern Sikkim, particularly Namchi, has the cold reserves. High pressure and low oxygen conditions, they end up producing that methane. Okay. Now, then India's rice fields rank amongst the world's top methane sources. When we talk about methane, now methane is potentially one of the most potent greenhouse gas in the world. Per molecule, it can be not in the plains. Obviously, within the plains, for example, if you have submerged vegetation somewhere, there it can be. For example, rice fields in the plains can always have methane, right? Now, here, understand this. When we talk about the case of methane, CH4, it is a very powerful greenhouse gas. That is, it warms up the atmosphere quite substantially. Compared to CO2, this has got greater warming potential per molecule, greater warming potential per molecule. Okay. But then we don't consider it to the scale of CO2 because it has got shorter life cycle. It dissociates and breaks in the atmosphere itself. That is why it is not considered to be that big an agenda. However, methane has been one of the leading causes of global warming in the past few decades. Now, across the world, methane emissions are being tracked by now satellites. You have the specific satellite that is methane sat, okay, which also tracks the methane emission. This study is different. This study is basically carrying out the study of methane emissions across the world. There it has indicated that paddy fields are one of the chief sources of methane emission. Now, particularly when we talk about paddy fields in India, how is it that paddy cultivation in India is carried out? If you basically have the field, it is flooded with water, isn't it? And then the saplings are planted. Now, these saplings underwater, again, remember our discussion of the first article, previous article. Underwater, what will happen to the supply of oxygen? It will be low. That means what? As a consequence of that, you will have anaerobic bacterium which will start working. Anaerobic bacterium will produce what? Methane. So, as a consequence, when the water evaporates and even through bubbles, methane gets emitted into the atmosphere. In India, you have substantially greater use of flood irrigation as a technology for or the technique for paddy cultivation. Other than that, you also have the abuse of fertilizers. What is the abuse of fertilizers? Disproportionate addition of fertilizers that also sometimes can lead to methane release as a byproduct. So that is where paddy fields have become the hub of methane emission. That is what the article is about. So global greenhouse gas emissions from paddy fields have nearly doubled since the 1960s. Now half of the emissions increase stems from what? loss of soil organic carbon in paddy fields. High methane levels result from flooded fields, continuous irrigation. That is why you have technologies such as direct seeding of rice, which has been provided by the International Rice Research Institute in Manila, Philippines. Now, in this, you don't need to flood the field and you need to provide lesser amount of water in that. Better irrigation and residue management can always reduce the greenhouse gas emission by 10 to 15%. However, one of the major challenges is that deployment of labor. That is going to be a shortage. Labor shortage, lack of technical know how. One of the other solutions can also be and should also be crop diversification. We still have regions in northwestern part of the country, despite of lack of water, we produce rice. Crop diversification, multi-cropping is the way to go. So why paddy cultivation emits CH4? Okay. So first of all, rice is cultivated under waterlogged conditions, creating oxygen deficient environment. Now, methanogenic microorganisms decompose organic matter and release methane, and that is emitted to the plant stems, soil surface, and even water bubbles. Okay, I already told you about the global warming potential per molecule for methane is 28 to 30 times more as compared to CO2 over a cumulative period of past century. Now, India has become a hotspot. India is the largest producer of rice in the world. Okay. So here, but that was attained last year itself. So paddy cultivation has increased by approximately 25% since the 1970s. Now, nearly 55% of India's rain fed agriculture is under rice cultivation, particularly. This is eastern and southern India, where rainfall is high. And most of them, they follow the flood irrigation methodology. Farmers incorporate crop residues into the flooded fields, right? That provides additional organic matter for the microbes to decompose, creating additional amount of methane production. Okay. Then heavy application of nitrogen fertilizer further increases the emission. So irrigated rice fields in India emit 3.9 million tons of methane annually, almost equal to and exceeding the emissions of Germany. What can be the solution or the way forward? Okay. Solution is improve water management, go for the system of or direct seeding of rice, system of rice intensification, alternate wetting and drying methodology, efficient fertilizer use, soil health improvement over a period of time. But the challenges, what are the challenges? Two, labor shortage, lack of technical know how. Okay, crop diversification is also a mitigation strategy. Okay, this all these pointers I have provided to you, it might seem text heavy, but the only purpose is I hope that you revise it and you are able to reproduce it in the mains exam. Okay, you have questions which are being asked out of this year after year. At that point of time, I don't want you to be short of these pointers. Please keep that in mind. Okay, natural manure is not a solution. Natural manure can also provide a long term emission of methane. Okay. Now, US has imposed new tariffs across the world. Now, here, India has got some amount of relief this time. Okay. So, but as I told you in the first article itself, Mr. Trump being Mr. Trump, there is so much uncertainty. You never know what tomorrow might hold for you. But here, 10% tariffs imposed are less than 12.5% that was initially proposed. Now they are on 60 countries based on the aspect of forced labor. You're not receiving the, I will upload it in my Telegram in the next 15 minutes. Don't worry. You can download it from there. In the next 15 to 20 minutes, you will get it. Tariffs are on 60 countries that US says have failed to stop the import of goods made out of forced labor. This is where forced labor has been used, okay, as a measure to impose tariffs. And mind you, ever since the federal court has upturned uh, the US administration's move to impose tariffs, US administration was seeking an alternate route to seek additional revenues from the countries, and that is where it basically has imposed these tariffs. 16 have the same rate as India, while 38 face higher tariffs. Now, out of Indian exports, substantial amount of them will be exempted from this tariff. Right? India US trade deal is very essential in the process. Now, here, basically, India's textile export to the US is a major issue. This is where we face an increased competition from Bangladesh, from Pakistan, and that is where it is a labor intensive industry. So that is where India wants the textile sector to be exempt from this. Okay. Now, having said that, this is something which is prone to change. So it is a follow up story. The entire article is talking about how the India and the US are in negotiations to arrive at a trade deal with the earliest possible date. Coming to something more important for the prelims, center considering two new dry ports in Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. Now, here, what are dry ports, first of all? Now, here basically it was being, you have the various different areas where the dry ports are being suggested. Now, Fatehpur in Telangana, the Chityala region in Telangana, Shri City in Andhra Pradesh, all of these. Now, all of this basically, yes, GS learning, that is correct. What are dry ports? Dry ports are inland, yes. These are, in a way, logistics hub. Okay. Now, what is it's not necessarily on riverbanks, not necessarily. That is different. Okay. So it can be on riverbanks also, it can be in inland regions also. So, see, a dry port is an inland terminal that is directly connected to the seaport via rail, road, or even the inland waterways. Okay. So, seaport, oftentimes, what is the major issue with the seaport? The traffic is very high. There is a lot of clogging out there. As a consequence of that, you don't have quick export import, which happens. Economic losses occur. All right. So, what if rather than all the materials directly dumping into the seaport, you have another place in the interior where the local producers they will basically accumulate the materials. As and when the clearances are provided, you can have a smoothened, a streamlined supply to the seaport. That is basically the case of where your logistics can be more efficient. As a consequence of that, correct, you can have a very integrated supply chain. It will reduce the logistic cost burden on the producers and improve your price competitiveness. So, key points: located inland away from the sea, functions like a seaport when it comes to cargo clearance, customs, etc. So that from there directly it can be transported, loading onto the ships, and can be cleared. Cargo is moved to and fro in the seaport by rail. So you need to have the infrastructure supply of highways, roadways, railways, reduces the congestion and dwell time at the seaport. Right, correct. Cargo handling and storage, customs clearance, container stuffing, destuffing, everything can happen here. It will decongest the seaports, reduce logistics cost and time, improve the hinterland connectivity. So, from the hinterland, rural areas, suburban areas, it will move to the dry port container. From there, by rail, it can move. So, you have Dadri, then you have the region in Haryana, that is the Katwas. All these areas are basically examples of dry port. Now, ONGC starts drilling first deep water well in Mahanadi. Now, that is where basically it is an exploratory well for hydrocarbon exploration. Now, eastern coast of India is seen to be one of those areas which can have hydrocarbon which is trapped underneath it. Now, this is being carried out under the government Samudra Manthan mission. Now, that becomes important for your examination. So, where the drilling is happening, Mahanadi offshore basin, Krishna Godavari offshore basin, oil reserves are to be found. So, if you can see the background image of the country, here there have been proven hydrocarbon resources. Now, the drilling is happening here because this is a region which is an emergent coastline which basically has emerged from under the sea over a period of time. So that is why chances of hydrocarbon is very high. Hinterland, interior areas, simple interior areas, the regions which are not very well connected by the national highways or the case of your high speed rail, etc. The interior areas. Okay. So here for your exam becomes important the Samudra Manthan mission. What is the Samudra Manthan mission? Launched, basically it is about exploration of oceanic resources, hydrocarbon, methane hydrates, polymetallic nodules, mineral exploration, everything is covered under Samudra Manthan mission. For your exam, important to know which ministry. So, Ministry of Earth Sciences. Okay. 5th June 2025. Now it is to explore the depth of the case of the Samudra Manthan. It is explore the depth of the ocean as well. So here, objectives explore deep ocean for resources, advance ocean science and tech, and eventually focus on polymetallic nodules, which can have critical minerals like lithium, cobalt rich crust, methane hydrates, deep sea biodiversity, submarine geohazards, ocean climate interlinkage, even hydrocarbon. Now, for this, India has developed and is developing multiple indigenous technologies as well: deep sea mining system, autonomous underwater vehicle, remotely operated vehicle, deep sea observatories. We basically have the dedicated ocean research vessel, that is Sagar Nidhi, which has also been developed. Okay, so indigenous state of the art ocean research vessel equipped with advanced laboratories to carry out ocean surveillance. Major points you need to know looking at the present trend of, but you can basically come at the summarization of this just by your normal logic: oceanic resources and its extraction. Explanation: appropriation of Dadri as a good place. Dadri is a very good place for the dry port. Dadri, in the outskirts of Delhi NCR, is basically a region where all the local areas, you have the agro based industries, food processing industries in that region, small scale manufacturers from the region of Ghaziabad, Sahibabad. That is the industrial hub. Now, Dadri is located across the eastern corridor of the NCR. It is a part of the it is a part of the Delhi Mumbai industrial corridor, the dedicated freight corridor as well. So, in a way, all the production, produce, export, import materials which can come from the northern part of the country, which have to be exported, let's suppose, through the Mumbai corridor, will have the logistics hub or the dry port accumulation region in Dadri. And thereafter, through the high speed dedicated freight corridor, it can be directly moved to JNPT. And from there, it can be exported to any other country with a logistical ease. So that is why Dadri is very, very ideal place for that dry port. Having said that, it needs a much greater infrastructural update. Presently, if you go to Dadri, it is a pollution center out there. Now, Sarnath has been added to UNESCO heritage list. Now, we will cover it from the PIB data because that has covered it in much greater detail. But basically, 48th session of World Heritage Committee being held in Busan, South Korea. That is where you had the case of Sarnath, the Buddhist site of Sarnath, being added to the UNESCO World Heritage List. This is very, very important for your prelims. Don't expect a question that which of these have been added. You can have questions associated with Buddhism being asked in the portion of your ancient history and art and culture that is associated with Sarnath, right? So here it basically it has got inscriptions and it comprises of two component parts, that is the Chokandi Stupa, that is, and the archaeological remains of Sarnath. Right. Now, it is here that you also had the case of the Ashokan pillar, which became the national emblem. Main angle to mission Samudra Manthan, Atmanirbharta, the aspect of your self-reliance, critical minerals, the case of Matsya 300, Samudrayan mission, all of them can be interlinked to the Samudra Manthan mission. Even in the case of energy dependence, we are dependent on import of oil, right? You have the case of oil reserves being found off the coast of Andaman Nicobar, mission Samudra Manthan, off the coast of Odisha, mission Samudra Manthan, critical minerals, Mission Samudra Manthan. Everything can be linked. Link it to Viksit Bharat 2047. Get a good mains answer. Now, here, by the way, the prelim centric portion of Sarnath, here it is the case they all refer to a sacred geography where Buddha visited in the 6th century and delivered the first sermon, turning of the wheel of law, Dharma Chakra Pravartan. And this is where it marked the inception of the Buddhist Sangha and establishment of the principles of the Eightfold Path that was provided. First sermon of Gautam Buddha and where he met his disciples has been in decline since the 12th century, and after that it was substantially degraded, right? Ancient monuments constructed from pre-Mauryan period, 5th, 4th century BC to 3rd century BC, up until 12th century AD. Stratified settlement across 16 centuries are to be found. Now, here, after declaration of Sarnath, three of the four most Buddhist pilgrim sites, that is Lumbini, Mahabodhi Temple, Bodh Gaya, and now Sarnath, all of them have been added into the World Heritage, along with other sites, that is Sanchi, Nalanda, Ajanta, which are in India. Then you have the Anuradhapur in Sri Lanka, Paharpur in Bangladesh, Takshila, and Taktibahi, which are in the region of Pakistan. Thereby, it gives India a kind of a primacy as the genesis of Buddhism, as the cultural hub of Buddhism, which can attract tourists from the entirety of the Eastern India. It will also help us in carrying out the diplomatic outreach in these regions. So it was included in the tentative list of the World Heritage Site in 1998. Now, it is here that the famous Mauryan lion pillar, which later became the national emblem, Dharm Chakra Pravartan of from the Gupta art. So from here, art and craft, art and culture questions can be framed. Okay. Now, last year, Maratha military landscape of India was inscribed in the World Heritage List. With 45 sites in the list, India is sixth globally in this UNESCO heritage and second in Asia Pacific region. Okay. Now, it is basically each year, each state party may propose just one site for identification. It has to be there earlier in tentative list, then to be recognized as a World Heritage Site. Then coming to the last topic, Center launches Disha 2.0. What is Disha 2.0? That is designing innovative solutions for holistic access to justice, launched by Ministry of Law and Justice. What is the purpose of this? It is, by the way, a central scheme, right? Now, here, leveraging technology to develop and enhance the outreach of citizens friendly solution platform for legal services. Okay, using technology as a medium to ensure that the citizens get access to the legal services in the easiest fashion. That is Disha. Okay, now this is Disha 2.0. This is basically where it has got four subcomponents. What are the four subcomponents? Tele-law, which means it connects people with panel of lawyers through mobile app and toll free number for pre-litigation services, okay, through use of video teleconferencing facilities. Then Nyay Sahayaks, who are active community based legal facilitators, they are also engaged. Then you have Nyay Bandhu, pro bono, free of cost, social benefit, legal aspect. Pro bono programs, Nyay Bandhu programs, voluntarily providing legal assistance to marginalized and disadvantaged sections of the society. Now, pro bono panels have been already constituted in 23 high courts of the country. Legal literacy and legal awareness program, okay, engaging with institutions and building partnerships across the various ministries and departments to build connect with the grassroots workers. And you have Vidhi, which is basically vision for integrated delivery of harmonized legal services, Sanjeevani. Now, what is it? It is basically to enhance the monitoring mechanism for integration of all the services on a particular platform. So, centralized integrated dashboard will be created. It would create unified interface integrating data stream to multiple sources. Pro bono, that is free of cost. You provide legal services free of cost. For example, if I am a lawyer, I will, let's suppose I have a client, I charge certain money from it. I see underprivileged, vulnerable population. I provide them my legal services for free. That is a pro bono case. Okay. So you have pro bono panels also, which are created only for hearing these pro bono cases. Okay. That brings us to the end of the discussion here. I hope you have liked the discussion. You have liked the content. It has added value. If you have liked it, put that in the comment section and don't forget to click on the like, share, and the subscribe button. We meet again tomorrow. Till then, do take care of yourself. Goodbye. Thank you.